Just when you thought HDMI was settled, there's a new version, HDMI 2.2. We've got Phil Jones from Massimo. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Hey folks, I'm Gene Delasello with Audioholics. We got Phil Jones in the house. How you doing, Phil?
What's up, Gene? It's been a while since we had a chance to have a conversation.
It's been too long, my friend. It's been too long. I just don't get this, man. Why do we have more HDMI? I thought this was settled. I thought we were good. Why is there 2.2 now? We have to go over this and its impacts, not only in consumer audio, but gaming, everything in general.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity to go to CES this year, and that was one of the things that I was curious about, because in addition to doing audio stuff, I do a lot of video stuff as well. So I wanted to find out what the deal was, because right now we're not even maximizing what we already have, and now you're talking about a new version. So
Right.
Why? So we wanted to kind of take some time and talk about that. So there's a slide, I think it's the third slide it brings up that we want to talk about. And that has to do with, I was like, why is this a gimmick, right? But it comes down to this. There's other connections that support higher bandwidths than HDMI 2.1. Now, doesn't mean that you need it right now. It just means that these do, right? And people are concerned to make sure that they are prepared for the future. And so if you think about it, HDMI is a bunch of different, the HDMI Group is a bunch of different manufacturers that make cables, that make video technologies, that make televisions. And we have to think about this. Now, a computer has a display port and maybe an HDMI and maybe a USB-C input. This AVR does not, right? Behind me here. So we're already real estate challenged when it comes to inputs. But now you're going to tell me that I have to put in, 3 display ports to go along with this HDMI input to make sure that I'm going to be in the future have enough room for these higher bandwidths, or a TV. TVs do not have display ports on them. They have HDMI. So now it does not mean that you need to have it now, but in the future, I need to think about this as I build these products to ensure that I can stick with the most popular format found on televisions and AV audio products, which is HDMI. So think of it as planning ahead. Doesn't mean you need it right now, but let's come up with a format and plan ahead. And then we could talk about, are you ever going to need it? Because as a movie guy, I'll tell you, you probably won't. It just depends on if you're a hardcore gamer.
That's the interesting thing, Phil, because last time we did a whole series on 2.1 with you. They were great. I really appreciate you dropping all the knowledge on that, and I'll link that up. We were talking back a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, about 2.1 and its bandwidth being 48 gigabits. We don't even get 48 gigabits, right? We get at most 40 gigabits is about what we're getting through these chipsets, and nothing is streaming at that kind of data rate. Not even Kaleidoscape is streaming at that kind of data rate. So I guess where are we going with this? I just want more reliability. I want less dropouts in HDMI and handshake issues and all that stuff.
Exactly. So as we talk about, if you go to one of the next slides, Gene, it's talking about as you increase bandwidth, there's all these things you have to consider when it talks about video, right? Resolution, frame rate, color depth, brightness range, color space, and as you mentioned, things like operation, voice sync, copyright verification, HDCP, all that stuff, right? So there's all these elements that have to happen that you have to factor in as you build a cable. If you go to the next slide, the main thing that happens that we have to concern with when it comes to this increase in file size are those 3 things. If I want to increase the resolution, if I want more color depth, more shades of a color, and I want more frame rates. Because before we were like, wow, 4K, or HD or 4K at 120 frames per second. Now they're talking, they were talking about 4K displays at 480 frames per second, right? Well, guess what? 4 times as many frames means 4 times as much bandwidth in order to make that frame. So as we talk about increasing the resolution, more dots in each frame, or more frames per second, or more shades of color, the bandwidth size becomes gigantic, right?
Right.
So that's why they said, well, right now there isn't a 10K TV or a 12K TV. There is no displays that can support 12-bit or 14-bit, and there isn't any displays that can support 4K at 480 frames per second. But in the future, they will. And the goal is to try to build a format that when you buy the cable, or they finally sort out the system and get all the bugs out, we can keep that system for as long as possible. And I think that's kind of the idea behind this. You won't be able to use any of this stuff, but maybe in the future, if we sort it out, once we get it sorted out, we don't have to worry about starting from scratch again.
And let's just be clear, it's 2025 right now, and where our limitation for streaming and even Kaleidoscape is still 4K.
Yeah, it's still 4K, and that's only select things. So most of the most powerful sources you can get are 4K at maybe 60 frames per second, unless you get into some crazy game card, right? You get into some crazy graphics card, that's a whole nother story. Now, if you talk about it, if you keep going through the slides, this is the thing. The pipe gets bigger, there's more data. So the leap from 2.0 to 2.1 was like almost triple the bandwidth. Now we're doubling it. The cable, the way that we send a signal is identical to the older 2.1 FRL and all of that crazy geeky stuff. I don't think we have time for that. We can go into it later if you guys want to have crazy questions about it. But you and I, Gene, have done whole things on HDMI, TMS, TMDS transport, and FRL transport, and all that stuff. Just know that they can drive more signal down the lines of an HDMI cable. And it's still the same type of cable. We're just asking each line of that cable to do more. Before, each line had to do 12. There's 4 lines in a cable. Each line had to do 12. Now each line has to do, can you do the math on that? What is that? 24? Each line has to do 24 now.
Right. So let me ask you this now, with this 2.2, does this make copper cables obsolete? Are we going to just be doing fiber at this point?
Well, you got to remember, it depends on the length of the cable. Like we've given people the little tip of the day is the most effective length of an HDMI cable is between 2 meters to maximum maybe 4 meters. So 6 foot
about a copper
to 12 foot. Copper cable for acceleration. It's just easier. Now, a lot of times you could buy back in the days when we went to 2.1, you could have had an 18 gigabit cable, and then but magically, because you're only at 6 foot or 12 foot, it was more powerful, or it could support the bandwidth to go up. Right now, that's just the same thing. If you went out and bought a 48 gigabit, 12-foot cable, it may actually pass the 96. It's not guaranteed, but the one you have may. So it's one of those ones. Try it before you rebuy it.
What kills me about all this is we keep talking about higher bandwidths, and this could be a topic of another video. We're still not getting lossless audio over streaming. How could we not, when we have 96 gigabit, 48 gigabit band? What is up? Why can't we have lossless audio?
Well, that has to deal with the source devices and the formats, right? So yes, we talked about, oh, by the way, people go, well, how much can you go to? 16K is what they say you can do. It's going to be a while, people, before you go out and buy a 16K,
like hologram.
They'll be probably flying cars and stuff like that by the time you get to that. But this is the capabilities that we were actually talking about, right? Now, right now, for all you people, for the next 10 years, or I'll say at least 5 years, who are enjoying your beautiful Marantz or Denon AVR, playing back your Kaleidoscape and your Xbox and your PlayStation, 2.1 is going to be enough, right? We at Denon and Marantz have always been the first to introduce new technologies, and when it does become time for HDMI 2.2 displays, to appear and sources to appear, I guarantee you we're going to be the first ones to do it. But today we just want to talk about what it is, why do you need it, and if you do need it. So right there is the table. So it shows you all of the crazy combinations that you can do. 12K at 60 frames per second, 10K at 120 frames per second, uncompressed is what we're talking about here. Absolutely insane. But the question is, do you really need it? And and so if you go to next slides, let's talk about the realities of life, right? We already know that right now there's very limited 48 gigabit material. There's how many 8K sources are out, people? We've been talking 8K for a while. You want to be prepared for that. But the thing that people are using it for is gaming. Your PlayStations, your Xboxes, 4K 120. I was just doing some 4K 120 gaming on my Xbox Series X yesterday, and we have a PlayStation. No, we have another Xbox downstairs that people are playing 4K 120 games on down in our theater. So yes, there are applications for 48, but if you're a movie guy, not right, maybe not right now. And when you look at 96, you're more likely to see the 48 first. So don't feel like, oh my God, this new format, I have to have it right now, right? The receivers here that we have up to seven 40 gigabit inputs, and that shall keep you, that is state of the art when it comes to feeding a signal to a TV, and it will give every ounce of performance out of the TVs that are currently available, that will be available for the next few years off the sources that are available right
so
now.
People are asking when the AV12 is coming out. As far as I know, there's no replacement to the AV10 coming, right? Because of this, right?
One of the things we want to make sure that we are at the leadership when it comes to HDMI. So no, if there's an AV12 coming, I will let you know when I have permission to do so, because I like working here, right?
Yeah.
But I will tell you that we just want to have you guys understand what this 2.2 is, and do I really, really, really need it right now? So that's a conversation. But there are some things that we do have to point out. So I went in there and I was grilling them. I was like, 480 frames per second. Come on. I mean, what are you going to connect it to, right? Well, you're starting to see these crazy graphics cards that run these high-end gaming monitors, right? Now, if you go to the next slide, this is an LG. I was in the LG booth, or the LG Game Innovation Suite, and this little monitor was what, 240? 1440 at 240. Full HD at 480 frames per second, right? And I think the input lag was what, 0.03 response time. That is absolutely insane. Now, that normally right now requires a display port to just plug into the display port on the graphics card, right? In the future, HDMI doesn't want to get left out of the mix. So eventually, there will be a HDMI 2.2 enabled graphics card to plug into an HDMI 2.2 enabled monitor. But neither one of those are really out there yet.
It's crazy when you think of that much resolution on such a small screen. 32 inches, tiny.
Yeah, but it's more about just they were more concerned with the frame, the gaming. Like if you're looking at 480 frames per second, the smoothness when you're playing fast action is ridiculous. That's what they were more concerned with. Now, when it comes to these bigger ones like 12K, 16K, there's applications for that. Architectural, maybe big command centers. Like there's these big matrix switchers where I can feed one cable to a 24-foot by 16-foot, 12K display and show,
or frame walls, right? The frame walls.
Frame walls. When things like that. So that's where that comes in. But when we talk about it, bigger is not always better. So a lot of times, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So if you go to the next slide, this is the current system that most of the devices, including the Denons and the Marantzes, currently run. Right now, it can support up to 40 gigabits per second, uncompressed, right? Right now, if you look at it, at the content you're playing, most of it, 4K 30 is using 13 gigabits of it. Okay, 13, right? If I go to 4K 120 uncompressed on a 10-bit display, I can do 4K at 120 frames per second, uncompressed at 40,
Right.
right? Believe me, it's going to be a while before you need more than that. Now, there's also what's called DSC, lossless compression. We have always talked about 40 gigabits working, being great because it allows you not to use any kind of compression. But a lot of the earlier AVRs that had multiple inputs, back when we had one input on ours, was using DSC compression, and nobody looked at the picture and complained. So if you apply DSC compression, you can do 10K at 120 frames per second. When we start applying compression. I think there's a chart back later in the slides.
Is that the same
shows
thing that the HDMI balance do?
Well,
The HD base T balance?
the HD base T balance, the interesting thing with that is I'm not exactly sure how it does it. It does kind of that process. It compresses it losslessly, and then it adds it back. Which is, if you think about it, if you look at how CRCB works for video, we do that already. Green is the biggest channel. We just don't show it. And the thing
Right.
looks at the luminance, and then the CR, which is the red, and the CB, which is the blue. And it says, well, based on mathematics, this is what the green must be, right? So the way that you watch most of your content using video formats is using lossless compression. And it works perfectly fine. There's not a lot of RGB sources. Most of the stuff is YCRCB. So lossless compression works really, 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 really well. We're just not even using it now. So uncompressed, you could do this, right? With compression, 4K 120, 10K 120, 8K 120, 4K at 240. Yeah, you could do that. You just got to utilize the compression. So it's going to be a while before you really, really need. And will you ever really be able to tell the difference between a 10K at 120 frames uncompressed versus 10K at 120 frames per second using lossless compression? I'm sorry,
Right.
Eagle Eye, you probably aren't going to be able to tell, right? So those are the kind of things. So instead of worrying about bandwidth, things like color depth, is far more important. So.
And
So
how does this impact projectors? They're always a little bit behind the fixed panel displays, right?
The funny thing is the projectors are actually kind of ahead of starting to get ahead of the displays now. The new DMD, I'm gonna go, okay, let me take off my audio hat. Let me put on my projector video hat, right? DLP projectors have those little chip that has thousands or millions of little mirrors on it, right? That is ran by a little controller. The controller they use now is super fast. So the limitation of how fast you move those mirrors wasn't the actual mirrors, it was the controller of the mirrors. And now they have a new one that will do HD or maybe even 1440 at 480 frames per second. So it's going to get to the point where a lot of times these gaming projectors may be able to support higher frame rates than actual television consumer TVs. Now, we're not talking gaming monitors. We're talking about a consumer TV that you switch from watching, a giant TV show to a giant gaming. So while they talk about this highly promoted stuff, there's only one really notable feature. It has, by the way, 2.2 has all the features you found in 2.1. The other thing too is they're also trying to fix some of the bugs. So Gene, you were talking about sometimes that there's blackouts when it comes to sound. Sometimes there's audio sync issues where we came across when we first had 2.1 at, could we have a variety of projectors connected to TV, connected to AVRs, connected to sources. We come across those as well.
I even get lip sync. I get lip sync issues sometimes, like on Netflix, and I have to restart it. I'm like, what the heck? Seriously.
Yeah. Or you get the quick media switching, which is what they're trying to work on now, has issues. So basically, when you're switching, you're looking at Netflix and you go from the menu to the movie, the screen blanks out on a projector for like forever before the picture comes back. So those are kind of things that they're working on as well that not only can be applied to 2.1, is going to also be applied to 2.2. But there is one thing that they added, and one new feature that you just mentioned, that you had sync issues, right? And that's the next one, the next slide, which is called latency indication protocol. Because they went in, they said bandwidth, 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 bandwidth. And I said, so what for a movie guy? Who cares? And they said, okay, latency indication protocol, LIP. I love that. LIP, instead of lip sync, now it's just LIP, right?
Yep.
And what this is the original way that this works is your source communicates with your through your receiver to your TV, and they make sure that the timing is correct. But as the systems get more complex, sometimes that protocol or communication becomes difficult or becomes not as effective, and you end up with, you know, kung fu theater where the voice and the voice and the mouth does not match. And I've had that happen. We had a beautiful JVC projector, beautiful piece, right? And then we have the Marantz, and there was kind of the voice was slightly off, so we had to turn that feature off in order to, and then all of a sudden everything synced off. So there was just how they communicated. That's been fixed, but how they used to communicate was a little funky. So this is designed to kind of improve that. And I think there's a couple of different scenarios that are up there. Actually, let me stop and see if there's any questions, because I'm just rolling through this stuff.
No, people are just giving little comments here. I don't see anything major that needs to be. Some says, can you even see the difference? We already kind of talked about that. I mean, we're not even at the full capability of 2.1 yet. So
exactly. But I'm looking, like Stefan says, he already has a gaming monitor that supports 4K at 240 frames per second and 480 frames per second at HDMI at 1080p. And most likely he's using DisplayPort 2.1 to achieve that goal, because DisplayPort 2.1 can do 80 gigabits per second. In the future, because of HDMI, that will be another option for you. So to be
clear, let's say HDMI 2.2 is established and everything. Now we can't get this lip feature until we get a hardware upgrade on Denon and Marantz products, right?
Yeah. Well, it all depends on.
I'm putting you in a corner to answer this now.
What I
want
will say,
politician answer.
I have to be kind of a politician, because I can't tell you exactly what we're doing. But I will tell you this: Marantz and Denon went out of our way. If there's a way to do it via a firmware update to add additional functionality to our devices, we will go out of our way to do that. You know, I have not talked to the engineers about whether or not this is a firmware thing or a software thing. I have not talked to them yet. I'm quite curious about that. The nice thing is we're already using FRL communication. This is FRL communication at higher bandwidths. So the question is, just like a lot of the 2.1 features are available on HDMI 1.4 devices, it does not mean that this 2.2 feature may not be backwards compatible. But I cannot say yes or no, because I don't know. It's so new that I don't know.
To me, this is the most important feature that you've went over so far with 2.2, because I'm tired of the field problems where you have sync issues or you have handshake issues. I get people always asking me about that. You have to reset the whole system. So if we could eliminate that and actually have 100% reliability, so when the family's watching a home theater system and you're not home and you don't have to troubleshoot it for them, to me, that is worth its weight in gold right there.
Exactly. I mean, HDMI is the #1 source out there, but nothing's perfect. And think of it as evolution instead of revolution, right? So things are evolving slowly at a time, right? So if you look here, these are some of the scenarios, right? So a lot of times the receiver is, if this is your combination according to HDMI, the difference is probably unlikely, you know, but you may be able to benefit if there's when you're playing back, maybe a pair of headphones. Because remember, because there may be something in the AVR. So this scenario, which is where most of our receivers are, there may be a difference in this, but there may not be, but it's going to be not as dramatic, right? If you go to the next scenario, you know, the next scenario is maybe you have devices plugged into the TV, and then that's going from eARC to like a sound bar, right? So this may it may delay work. This may be more efficient now when you do this combination, right? I will make sure that we kind of share these. I'll figure out a way to kind of give you some of these slides, Gene. So if you want
Yeah.
to share them with some of your people, right?
Yeah, I'll throw it up on the Patreon channel so if you guys want to do
Okay.
that. I have a quick question for you. And we
Mhm.
talked about this with 2.1 back in
Mhm.
the day.
Mhm.
When you wanted to get higher res beyond 4K, it seemed like the only way to even get source material to demo was through the apps built into the TVs because the
Mhm.
streaming boxes themselves
Didn't
didn't
have it.
support that. Is that going to be a same thing going forward? Are we really only going to get access to this high res stuff going through the actual TV that supports 8K? Or do you think like the Apple TVs, the Rokus, the NVIDIA Shields, do you think those will catch up?
Well, it all depends on once it becomes the right decision for the broadcasters, right? Because a 4K signal is 4 times bigger than an 8K signal is 4 times bigger than a 4K signal. So
Yeah.
because of that, I have to get. They already are hesitant to give up 4 HD channels to give you a 4K channel. Giving up 16 HD channels to give you an 8K channel is challenging for them. They may do 1 or 2 for major events, maybe the Olympics in the future, or the Grammys or the Oscars, like super major events, like the Super Bowl or something like that, right? But then you have to shoot it that way. So if it's a live broadcast, is actually easier because 8K cameras, 8K switching. But if I'm trying to make a movie and I'm trying to store all of those files and do all of those special effects for a movie, and everything is 4 times bigger, the cost of making the movie goes up. So I think most likely you may start seeing some, if the capabilities do become available on streaming devices like Apple TVs and Mega Rokus, it's probably going to first be kind of, video on demand or special event live broadcasts. To me, seems like it'd probably be the easiest infrastructure. Cameras are
Yeah.
shooting in 8K.
Yeah, that
The
makes sense.
systems are in 8K. I just put it up there in 8K versus having to shoot everything on 8K and an 8K camera, do all my graphics in 8K, store all those files. Oh my gosh, as a video producer, they'll run away in panic. Especially if there's no theaters that are running 8K projection. So
Do you want to go over any of these connection
no,
diagrams?
it just shows you that there's going to be different scenarios where this may be beneficial. So whether you're running, some sources from the TV, some sources plugged into the AVR. Hopefully, when you have these kind of more complex combinations of things, you will be able to. It'll be less lip sync issues. Now,
Yeah.
I see a lot of questions up there about cables.
Yep.
So I figured we should cover that, right? So if you go through here, cables, a new cable, and look for the logo, right? This cable says that logo verified. It's been verified by one of the major companies that test cables that this cable will pass 96 gigabits per second. You can do it with copper, but it ain't gonna be a very long copper cable. So think about it this way: if I had if I could pass HD on a 25-foot cable, that cable will probably pass 4K. That type of cable, the inside of that cable, the way that cable was constructed, would probably pass 4K at 12 feet. And that same type of construction would probably pass, this bandwidth at 6 feet. You know what I mean? So,
But you know
copper.
what? There's great affordable fiber cables now. You got Bullet Train, which is solid. You've got the THX. I love the THX cables. I don't know if you had time to play with those or not. I use those on my Kaleidoscape, and they're fabulous, and they're not that expensive. What you don't need is a cable with a battery slapped on it.
Exactly.
You need a cable that actually has this bandwidth certified on it.
Optical is the way to go because, by the way, if you buy an optical cable, Gene, and there's a slide that talks about it, the fiber itself can support 100 gigabits per second. Each five, like if you get a multi-strand, each five, and that thing has 6 strands of optical in it. Each one of the strands can support 100 gigabits per second. So that cable theoretically can do 600 gigabits per second. The limitations are the ends. So one way would be you get a you run the optical and you use a balance, the converters, the transmitter and the receiver at the end to convert the signal. But say you ran that bullet train cable from all the way through your house, and the ends only support 40. You can cut those in. You cut the ends off, re-terminate those the ends of the cable, and plug it into a 96 gigabit balance system. So the nice thing about optical is buy once, cry once. If it's an optical cable, because a lot of them you'll be able to cut the ends off. So if I was going to buy an optical cable, the first thing I'd ask them, one of the pro companies, is, can I cut the ends off, and is it possible for me to re-terminate this cable in the future? You know, or if not, it'd be better off for you to run just the raw cable and then use the extenders for right now. They're bigger.
So what I would recommend to people that are doing new construction, obviously run Cat 6 everywhere, right? Run your speaker cables, all that stuff. But I would run fiber to every display. I mean, it might cost you a little bit right now up front, more than just running copper, but you're guaranteed future compatibility. So you don't have to worry about breaking a wall open if you want to increase the bandwidth of your video.
Exactly. So if you go, there's actually a slide. The next one, that's actually a cable they were actually showing at the show, a rocket fish, right? So let's be honest, marketers, right? 4K must be better than 2K. 2K must be better than, 8K must be better than 4K, right? Well, 16K must be better than 8K. So let me get if I'm a consumer, I'm going to be looking at the boxes, and the average consumer is just going to pick the box with the highest Ks on it. Right?
It's like the watts. How many watts is it?
Yep. How many watts is it? How many Ks do you have? Right? So that's the whole thing. And then this is, like we talked about it. The cable construction is the same. There's 19 wires in the cable. If you go to next slide, we used to run it. We used to run cables this way. You had 3 video channels and a clock channel, and then to keep everything in time, right? That's the old way up to HDMI 2.0. This cable, whether you buy a HDMI 2.1 or HDMI 2.2, uses the next slide, Gene. It uses FRL, right? The signal is divided into all 4 channels are utilized. Right now, we're for HDMI 2.1, it's up to 12. The new one will be up to 24. Same lines, same cable. They're not going to redo the inside of the cable. It's just how much data are they pushing down the lines of that cable. Now, if you look, there's all those other ones below that say CEC and utility and HPD, whatever that's where they're going to start sending all that lip information, right?
Oh, okay.
So that's your control. That is your 5-volt power. That is your all of the other data that goes back and forth. Your audio goes down those other wires. Okay. The top 4 are just the video signal.
Right.
So it doesn't. So if they're going to take one of those lines, CEC, and add lip to it, the question is, can you program the TV via firmware upgrade and to communicate it, and the receiver via firmware upgrade to understand it, but the cable is the same.
Right.
So too technical. Watch the other video for that.
Yep.
So FRL is the way we used to do it. Everything now, but this is the new way of doing it. The goal was to maximize the length of the cable and all that type of stuff. So way, that's way more technical than where I want to go right now. But this is the one I want to talk about: compression. Most of the time we talk about 40 gigabits, we're talking about uncompressed and what it can do with uncompressed. But with compression, the bandwidth goes incredibly high. I mean, you can pass a lot more signal to it, right? So think of it as lossless compression. If I tell you that 2 minus A equals 4, right? So 2 minus A, or 4 minus A equals 2. Well, okay. Well, what would A have to be? If it was 4 before, and then it was 2 after, that means A has to be 2. That's lossless compression, right? So it's not making things up. It's just using mathematics based on the data that's provided to fill in the data that it doesn't have, right? So that's why people say, people say, can you see a difference between compression and lossless compression and compression? The answer is no, you can't. Okay.
That's pretty definitive statement, because I've heard a lot of people claim they can, but I haven't seen any
That's
proof.
one of those things when they tell you that they can hear the difference between, I mean, how many times people say they can hear the difference between, this has got 0.0005% distortion, and this one's got 0.1% distortion. I can hear the difference. Can you? In a double-blind test, uncompressed, okay, if I took 4K at 60 frames per second, 10-bit compressed, and 4K, lossless compressed, and 4K 60 frames per second, 10-bit uncompressed, do you really think you can see the difference? I would love to do that. I would say it's doubtful. Very, very, very doubtful. The differences in the lens of a projector would have a bigger impact,
right,
than in the compression scheme you were talking about. And then this goes back to, like we talked about, the compression and how you can compress and things like that. And I think by the way, those types of things can be found on Meridio. I love those guys. If you go to meridio.com or avpro.com, you could download these really detailed charts on what you can do. All this is showing you is based on how you select the inputs on our AVR, what's the maximum signal uncompressed you can support. That's what that is. So, and it's a lot. All right. So just remember, as bandwidth goes up, the length of the cable goes, it has to get shorter and shorter and shorter.
Unless you use the fiber, then you have way more flexibility.
Exactly. Let's use the fiber, because if you go to fiber, the reason why this length thing happens, Gene, if you go to the next slide, the way a cable works is there is not signal and then no signal. It is how much signal can I pass before the signal becomes so corrupted the display does not know what it is, right? So as the cable gets longer, it starts adding more distortion, more noise. The shape of the signal starts to change to the point where it can no longer be identified, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time when you buy an active optical cable, you're not boosting the signal. One of the ends is noise reduction.
Yeah.
So all it's doing is saying, okay, the signal is so messed up, let me clean it up so the TV can understand it. So it's not boosting the signal, it's cleaning the signal.
And you usually do it only on one side of the cable.
And you do it on one side. And guess what side it's on? It's on the source. It's on the display side, because once it gets there, it needs to be cleaned.
Yeah.
So that's when when we talk about an optical copper cable, that's what that does. When we're talking about an active optical cable, one of them is taking the electrical signal, converting it into light. And then at the other end, it's taking the light and converting it back to electrical signal. So that's a different thing. So how an active optical cable works is completely different than how an active copper cable works. And like I said, each one of those fibers can support right now. If you look at that cable, there's 6 fibers in there. Each one of those can support 100 gigabits per second. That's a 600 gigabit piece of wire right there. So
run optical in new construction, please. Run conduit if you can, in case you need to snake a cable out.
Exactly.
Pay the money up front. Trust me, I didn't do conduit everywhere I needed to do, and I'm kicking myself.
Exactly. So when you run that cable, then you would get a balun, right? Or some sort of extender. This is an older fiber extender. Now they sell Meridio, and these companies sell fiber extenders that easily do 40 gigabits per second. But the cool thing is, the most expensive thing is running that wire through the house. Replacing the ends, it's nice to know that all I got to do is go up there and swap out the 2 boxes. Or if you go to the next slide, if you buy a good piece of cable, you can just cut the ends off.
Yeah.
So what's in that cable is basically that cable. Think about it, is the fiber cable and those 2 boxes, one on one side and one on the other side, miniaturized to fit into the tips of that cable. Right.
But guys, I did a video on Bullet Train, and I'll link that up as well. I use that in my family room system. So I've got the AV10 right here in the office. I've got the AV10 up here. My family room system is downstairs. I've got Bullet Train going from this all the way to the display, and it's it's great.
Exactly. So actually, let's go look. There's some good comments in the chat. So Polyester Pimp's talking about, championing higher refresh rates. If you're a gamer, that's where this thing shines. Downstairs we have an AV10, and we have an Xbox. We also have a PlayStation, which I don't have connected, and we have a high-end graphics computer that can run, 8K gaming and 4K 120. And playing games on a 165-inch screen in Dolby Atmos, at 120 frames per second is if you're a gamer, it's a religious experience. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You could do that now, right? And that's going to be far beyond exceeding the capability for most, but the most hardcore gamers. And most of the hardcore gamers are going to be sitting there with a super fast custom Zowie, 1 millisecond gaming rig right here next to it, like this. People, they're not going to run it through an AVR. They're going to have a pair of headphones on, a little headset, talking about Roger, contact over there, shooting people on a gaming display that's this big, But for our customers that are using AVRs, and you're looking for just a spectacular console gaming experience, that is the way to go. I'm telling you, playing something like Call of Duty with full Dolby Atmos on a 165 screen is amazing, right?
Oh, I bet.
So that's the way you need to go.
It's funny you have a slide about Conduit when I was just talking about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't look at the slide deck in advance. So
I are on the same page, right?
Yeah.
So, oh, by the way, this last one, we're going to start doing more stuff again on this on the YouTube channel, and I'm going to do more with Eugene for live stream, because there's a whole bunch of questions on there about Dirac and Rune and stuff like that. So we're going to do more of these, people, with me and Gene. But I'm also going to be doing more on this on our own channel. So make sure that you please like and subscribe, so I can tell my boss that, look at how many people are going to show up at my live stream. Can I please do more of these instead of doing, Excel spreadsheets, please? Right.
Yeah. I'll put a link in the video description for your YouTube channel. That way people could go and visit it. We'll definitely link up. And Phil, I'm going to commit you to coming on this channel at least once a month.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'd love to.
At least once a month.
I'd love to. Okay. So let's look and see if there's anything else in the chat. Let's scroll up there. I'm looking at some of the chat here. Don't worry about that. That's for you. Oh, by the way, if you're a dealer and you want to really kind of dive into stuff, that's what that is. Massimo Consumer Learning. And that goes through and talks about more of the technical stuff. So I'm looking here. So we talked about 2.2. I can also answer, I know some other questions, so I'll give somebody some teasers. So let's scroll up to the top here, because somebody was asking some non-HDMI questions. I hate leaving those guys.
People were talking about USB-C, already supports 40 gigabits.
Yeah, and they think that's going to go up. So yeah, so HDMI is the vehicle. Think of HDMI as the traffic cop. HDCP is, HDMI is the vehicle. HDCP is, do you have the license to drive the vehicle? Basically, is what that is. Do you have rights to utilize this content? That's the content protection portion of this, which I think right now we're at
DSD. We don't stream in DSD. I mean, that's everything is Dolby Atmos.
Everything is Dolby Atmos, PCM. There is, theoretically, there's enough bandwidth. So theoretically, if somebody decided they wanted to do, 192 24 FLAC files, that's a joke for the bandwidths we're talking about now. Video bandwidth is substantially bigger than audio bandwidth. The audio signal on an HDMI cable is an afterthought. When you look at the size of the bandwidth, the question is, are we allowed to send the signal down the line?
Which is what kills me, because, and not to get too far off topic, you go and watch a movie on Apple TV or Roku, whatever, Netflix, you watch Top Gun 2, you go and you listen to the soundtrack on that and then compare it to a Kaleidoscape, it's night and day. The Kaleidoscape just mogs it. You get way more detail, not only in the sound, but in the height channels. And it's because of all the compression. And I don't understand why we can't get past this when we have the bandwidth. We need better sound quality with these streams.
Yeah. I think what's going on is the producers of content are still hesitant about the bandwidth capabilities of the systems.
And they're
So
trying to optimize it for sound bars instead of home
they're trying to
theaters.
optimize. They want to make sure that it works on more things
Yeah.
reliably. So they're very cautious about adding more capabilities without breaking something. All right. We're like that too, by the way. People ask us stuff about why don't you have room on everything? It's like we're trying to, well, we have to do them one at a time. Why don't you add this service? Well, what if I add the service in there wrong and I break the system, 6 million AVRs because I'm rushing to do something? So as these companies get bigger, and we're talking about technologies that span across hundreds of thousands and millions of devices, you got to go a little slow. And that's how we are too, because people are always pushing. Why aren't we, at Denon and Marantz, more make this, make that, add this, add that? Well, we have to do it in a way that, number one, it's backwards compatible with all the older stuff, and we don't break something for all of the users that are out there that are using it right now. So caution is one of the things about, it's like moving the Titanic, people, but we want to make sure that as we move, we don't break, we don't hit an iceberg and sink. All right.
When do you think we're going to see the first gen consumer grade HDMI 2.2 displays?
I think because they announced it at the show, probably CES next year, they will probably show, because you're starting to see displays out there right now that can support, 240. It's just TVs, consumer TVs that are doing 4K 120. I can totally see 4K 240, 4K 480 things. Because let's be honest, they tried 8K. Some customers aren't gravitating to it. They realize that the thing that people are really liking about HDMI 2.1 is ultra low lag, ultra high frame rate gaming. So adding those capabilities to 4K and using that bandwidth capability on these receivers and the sources is probably going to gravitate towards more customers. So you're probably going to see more of that type of stuff promoted over, hey, look, this can do 4K at 8K at 60. Because you're going to say, well, what am I going to do with that? But I can plug in the, PlayStation 7, and get, HD at, or 1440 at some stupid, frame rate.
Now, let me ask you a question. Assuming that the DNM products have an upgrade path to 2.2, are you going to support the internal tests so we could test cables capabilities up to 2.2?
Well, remember when we talk about this, our HDMI diagnostics can do right now up to 40 gigabits per second.
Right.
If they add that feature we talked about, or if that is not a bandwidth issue. That is another level of communication. So if that happens, you would just get an indication. You would see QMS, you would see this, you would see that, and then you would see lip when you plugged in when you brought up your on screen. Not saying it's going to happen, but when it does happen in future pieces, or whenever it does happen, that would be how you would check it. You would just hit the info button on your Denon or Marantz AVR. It'll show you the bandwidth, the signal, which is probably going to be 40-ish. And then it's going to show you, what other features, audio low latency mode, quick media switching, VRR, lip, not lip, it's hilarious. Very creative when they came to their word.
So a non-HDMI question I think is important to address and put you on the spot, because I've said this before. Someone's asking why Denon integrated amps have no subwoofer output, and I could speak to that because I have the AV10, the A110, which I love. That masterpiece design, beautiful sounding amp.
Bodie McBoat face. It's hilarious.
But it has record out. It doesn't have sub out. Why aren't you guys putting subwoofer outs? Even if it's just a full bandwidth, at least make it variable so you could use the bass management of your sub.
That's a good request. I'll talk to the engineers about it, but they're really about the purity of signal, adding another split off to do that. They're worried about them. They were like, okay, they're worried. They want to make that, convincing the audio engineers that to do that and having them be comfortable to do that without what they would believe would be impact the sound quality is where we're at. So they have to be the Denon stuff is incredibly analog, so you're not going to get low pass and high pass in it, right? So now it just because am I comfortable splitting the signal in a
Well,
weighted
it's already
hybrid.
there with the record out. We just need variable.
Exactly. But
Yeah,
yeah, so it would just have to be, because the record out doesn't have to run through a volume knob. It's just a split of
correct.
signal.
Yeah, that
The
makes sense.
second the second I decide I want to make it variable, I gotta be able, it's gotta now run through the volume knob. And how is that gonna, what's that topography and to rewire the amplifier to do that, the insides of the amplifier to do that, and how is that going to impact the quality of the volume, you know, and convincing them that it's going to. But it's one of those
All right.
things that if the more requests we get for that,
Mhm.
the more likely it is to happen. Like, for example, many years ago, if I said, "Do you want digital room compensation and hi-fi audio files around a room in terror?"
Yeah.
Digital.
Now they all want it.
Now they all want it. So now we have to go back and revisit the engineers and say, "Remember how I said, don't you ever, 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 ever do this? Can you do it now?" So that's where we're at. So
I
those
get
types
2
of
more
things will come.
questions we're gonna entertain, and then we're gonna wrap this up because we're
Okay.
approaching the hour.
Mhm.
Any path to upgrading to this 7706? Is there a replacement coming to that you can talk about?
um,
An AV20 or something, or an AV something, you know?
um, I cannot comment on future products until those products are available.
All right, well, I'll keep
but but I
asking.
but I will but I will tell you that that is a request that they know that is important to people, and you know I cannot comment on the things that
Well, I could tell people this for now, buy the latest gen, Marantz receivers
Mhm,
because they have the preamp disconnect feature.
mhm.
And you've got state of the art right there. I mean,
Yeah,
really good performance. So yeah, that would be my recommendation if you want to stay in the D&M
yeah.
family of products. Then the last one here is will 2.2 improve HDMI CEC reliability? We already addressed that, and it sounds like it will.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is the lip sync, and then like it's there's always the stuff that goes on behind the the curtains that you don't see. So, for example, if you look at Heos, we're on. I'm going to do a Heos video. We're on U35. So even though the outer section has only been reskinned 4 times, we're on the 35th version of that software, right? Trying to make it more reliable and improve the user interface. So while HDMI 2.1 may be, we may be on 2.1, but we may be on HDMI 2.1 version 17 for all you know. So they're constantly working on that type of stuff. So hopefully they're learning with HDMI 2.1, and then and they're fixing the bugs. Either it's going to be part of the 2.1 and backdate it, or it becomes part of 2.2.
Awesome. Well, Phil, I appreciate you dropping the knowledge here. Guys, we have an HDMI 2.2 article on audioholics.com. It's kind of a primer to what you're
Mhm,
getting with these new features.
mhm,
I'm going to link it in the video description, and I'm also going to embed this video in that article so you guys have more information. And as we get more development on HDMI 2.2 hardware, of course, we're going to have Phil back on here to drop more knowledge
mhm,
on it. We want to stay ahead of the curve so you guys understand what's coming down the pipeline.
mhm.
And if you like this video, guys, please hit the thumb up, hit subscribe. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to me if you want to suggest video topics. Phil, what do you want to talk about in our next live stream? Let's give everybody a little preview.
Well, there's 2 things we can do. I mean, we could talk about, revisit where do you get all different type formats. Like, right now there's a lot of streaming services that offer Dolby Atmos. But what about if I want to listen to DTSX, or what about IMAX Enhanced? That would be kind of a fun one to talk about.
Sure.
We could talk about, we have started to add things like, rune tested to our devices. What does that entail? What's the timeline on that? We can cover that type of stuff. We could talk about, you know, advancements in streaming music. Whether we're talking about, where do I get multi-channel? Where do I get Dolby Atmos? What's the best sources for that? What's the advancements at Helios? So there's lots of things we could talk about. And if there's any new products coming, we could talk about that as well.
All right. Well, appreciate it again, Phil. Guys, I hope everyone has a great weekend. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.
Take care, everyone.